Festival. Nick Smallman is the chief executive of Working Voices, an international communications training skills consultancy. They work with politicians and corporate leaders. Nick, hello.
Hello.
Why has Hilary Benn's speech received so much discussion, I suppose, received really well?
Well, there are two reasons. One is contextual. Hilary Benn is not known for his rousing oratory, and that was his 15 minutes of extraordinary oratory that really was just so well delivered. But secondly, he's the son of Tony Benn, who is used to hearing Tony Benn in the past with a very anti-war, pacifist stance. So that's the first sort of part of it. And the second part, obviously, is the fact that it was delivered with such clarity, such conviction. He was the leader, in a way. He made the Prime Minister look less leader-like and actually dug the Prime Minister out of a hole, I think, because his case was so forensic, so specific. It was almost lawyerly in the way he sort of dissected the reasons for doing it. And yes, I think he absolutely would have helped MPs who were wavering to make up their minds. He sort of gave them permission to vote with the government's motion. Yeah, it was brilliant.
So what kind of... when you say that he's not known for... Actually, I did see his keynote speech at the Rising Peace Festival, and he was a very good speaker there. I mean, he did speak incredibly passionately and well at that event, and was there at a peace forum, and yet weeks later now has, somewhat ironically, I suppose you could say, led those that were undecided into military action.
But that's the thing, isn't it? When someone who is known for supporting causes for peace comes out so hard and so unequivocally for military intervention, it makes people who agree with him in the main to stop and think, hold on, am I missing something here? And also, it was he put everything into context so beautifully. I mean, part of it was almost Shakespearean. He used phrases like "under the yoke of Daesh." He put everything into historical context. He used, he talked about the UN that Labour helped to form in the late 40s. He talked about the UN Charter. He talked about sort of moral responsibility, and everything was delivered in a beautifully clear tone. Everything was forensically split up. It was, in the same way that a lawyer in a courtroom would, sum up a case in a particular way to convince the jury to go in their direction. That's exactly what he did. The use of the phrase, I know, or we know, and he kept saying, we know, these are facts, these are absolutely undisputable facts. It was very, very difficult to sort of argue against it because it was delivered with certainty, with clarity, and with a structure, I think, that was extremely easy to understand and follow. And I really think he did the government a huge favour, because David Cameron had been looking slightly churlish all day with his refusal to apologise. And that's another thing that was really huge about the speech. Right at the beginning, I mean, David Cameron had been asked to apologise all evening. But Hilary Benn was like the adult saying, Prime Minister, it's really not on, and made the Prime Minister look really small, but then came out on the Prime Minister's side. I mean, the speech itself just sort of defied logic and gravity in so many ways in the way it eventually went, but it was just so beautifully done.
Will it go down as in the history of the House of Commons? Will it have that level of magnitude, do you think?
Well, I think it depends what happens with ISIS, or Daesh as they're now known. I mean, a lot of his father's speeches are sort of viral on social media, and funnily enough, I was watching Robin Cook's resignation speech just after the call to go to war in Iraq, which was a wonderful speech in a completely different way. It was much more sort of mellow and sort of thoughtful. But yes, I think if we end up going in and dealing with ISIS in a way that's agreeable, his speech will be seen as sort of a rallying cry, almost Henry V-like. But if it just sort of grinds on for 4 or 5 years and nothing really happens of consequence, then probably not. I think a lot of it is what the speech represents. It was a galvanising speech.
Yeah, and will you, as somebody that works with politicians on delivery of speeches and corporate leaders, will you be using it as an example of how to do it well?
Well, absolutely, because there were so many plus points The structure was fantastic. He was so clear. I always think when you have conviction, your diction, your articulation goes up a level. And he was so clear because he really meant it. I think when people really mean stuff, their articulation goes through the roof. And it was just to listen to it on the radio was fantastic. To watch it on television was fantastic. And at one point, the Commons was simply in silence. That you could tell the gravity and the power of a speech when there's no cheering and yah-booing and all that kind of stuff that goes on. There was just silence, listening to this guy who really was at the top of his game.
How do you feel, Nick, personally about the decision that was made?
Well, I think it's a complicated decision. There's a lot of evidence that sort of airstrikes don't do a lot, and that you need, ground forces, etc., and you need to cut off the funding. And there's sort of many strands to dealing with this threat. I suppose you could say you would like to leave it up to the intelligence services to advise the politicians properly so they can make the right decision. And I think the problem for a lot of people in Britain is most subjects like this are complex. And, you spoke to the guy on the street who said, yes, I'll feel safer because we're bombing. But why are we doing it? What does it mean? What are the consequences? What are the unintended consequences of all of this? I mean, ISIS is, you could argue, is an unintended consequence of the Iraq war. So we have to be very careful when feeling scared and wanting to do stuff. You totally understand the French wanting to do something dramatic after what happened in Paris. And it's important that we stand with the French, etc. But I think the better answer is a complex answer that requires all sorts of other methods, such as cutting off funding, training regional forces, etc., etc. That probably is the best way to do it long term.
Nick, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Nick Smallman, Chief Executive of Working Voices, an international communications training skills consultancy that work with politicians and corporate leaders.